The Blackwood State Park in rural Maryland was renowned for its dense, ancient forests and treacherous, boggy terrain. Locals whispered stories of forgotten trails, hidden sinkholes, and a history that felt older and darker than the moss-draped trees. For Alex, a disgraced cryptozoologist desperate for a career comeback, it was the perfect hunting ground. He was convinced the latest string of unexplained disappearances in the area wasn't just typical missing persons cases. It was something other. His crew consisted of Chloe, a sharp, cynical drone operator, and Ben, a former park ranger whose knowledge of the woods was encyclopedic, but whose usual cheerful demeanor was noticeably strained out here. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of damp earth, and something faintly sweet and sickly, like decay. According to these old maps, there's a section of the park nicknamed the Scar, Alex explained, pointing to a faded, hand-drawn map. An area never fully recovered after a massive forest fire decades ago. Locals say nothing grows there, but something lives there. They pushed deeper into the woods, the path narrowing, the trees growing impossibly tall and close. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting eerie, shifting shadows. Chloe's drone, usually a steady companion, was acting up, its signal constantly flickering. "Getting a weird energy spike, Alex," she muttered, adjusting her goggles. "Like biological interference and a lot of static." Then they found it, a section of the forest unlike anything they had seen. The trees here were skeletal, twisted, and blackened, as if they had indeed been burned, but with an unnatural, almost violent contortion. The ground was not earth, but a thick, spongy layer of black matted fungus, pulsing faintly with a dim, phosphorescent green glow. The sweet, sickly smell intensified here, cloying and nauseating. "This is the Scar," Ben whispered, his face pale. His gaze was fixed on something ahead. In the center of the glowing fungal patch stood a clearing, and in that clearing, a sight that made Alex's blood run cold. It wasn't an animal. It was a humanoid figure, hunched and impossibly tall, its limbs grotesquely elongated and twisted. Its skin, where visible, was not skin at all, but a raw, glistening mass of reddish-black muscle and sinew, exposed and pulsating. Large, dark scars and deep fissures ran across its body, filled with the same glowing green fungus that covered the ground. Its head was a nightmare. What appeared to be the remnants of a human skull was partially exposed, but the rest of its face was a mass of gnarled, twisted bone and cartilage, with two deep, hollow eye sockets that burned with an internal, malevolent red light. Long, sharp claws tipped its hands, coated in something dark and wet, and from its gaping, lipless mouth, a low, wet gurgle escaped, a sound that seemed to choke on itself, followed by a faint, wet drip, drip, drip onto the fungal ground. It was the sound of blood, fresh blood. Suddenly, the creature's head snapped up, its glowing red eyes fixed on them. It wasn't blind, it was hunting. And as it took a slow, shuddering breath, the glowing green fungus on the ground pulsed violently, and a faint collective whisper rose from the very earth beneath their feet, cold and guttural. Fresh meat. Join the forest. Alex, Chloe, and Ben stood frozen, staring at the horrifying abomination. This was no cryptid. This was a nightmare made flesh, born of the haunted Maryland woods, and it was very, very hungry. The monstrous creature in the clearing stood perfectly still, its glowing red eyes fixed on Alex, Chloe, and Ben. The faint whisper from the earth, fresh meat, join the forest, seemed to wrap around them, cold and suffocating. The sweet, sickly smell was unbearable now, making their stomachs churn. Run! Alex finally managed to gasp, his voice a hoarse whisper. They turned and stumbled backward, tripping over roots and thorns, trying to escape the horrifying sight. The creature didn't immediately follow. Instead, a new sound began to rise from the glowing green fungus on the ground. A low, rhythmic thrumming like a deep heartbeat that vibrated through their boots. The phosphorescent glow intensified, making the ground look like a sinister, pulsing carpet. It's everywhere, Chloe whimpered, looking down at the ground. She saw thin, hair-like filaments of the green fungus slowly emerging from the earth, coiling around the base of the twisted trees. As they tried to run through the skeletal forest, the ground beneath their feet became soft, almost spongy. Their steps sank into the glowing fungus, making a sickening squelch sound with each movement. The skeletal trees around them seemed to lean closer, their blackened branches reaching down like skeletal fingers. Suddenly, a thick, gnarled root, pulsing faintly with the green glow, burst from the ground directly in front of Ben. It wrapped around his ankle with surprising speed and strength, yanking him off his feet. He cried out as he fell, his headlamp beam shooting wildly into the dark canopy. "Ben!" Chloe screamed, rushing to help him. The creature in the clearing began to move, slowly, deliberately, its gnarled limbs unfolding with a wet, cracking sound. The exposed muscle and sinew on its body rippled, and a thick, dark fluid, glistening with red, slowly oozed from its many fissures, dripping onto the glowing fungus. "It's pulling me!" Ben yelled, struggling against the root. He tried to cut it with his knife, but the root was tough, almost like petrified wood resisting his blade. Alex, frozen for a second, saw something truly terrifying. As Ben struggled, the green fungus on the ground around the root began to spread rapidly, growing over his boots, crawling up his pants, seeming to absorb him into the earth. The air filled with a chorus of low, guttural gurgles, not from the creature, but from the ground itself, from the living fungus. "It's taking him!" Chloe shrieked, pulling at Ben's arms, but it was like pulling against the very earth. The creature from the clearing was now only a few feet away, its glowing red eyes fixed on them. It raised one of its long clawed hands, and from its fingertips, thin glowing green tendrils extended, reaching for them like slow-motion whips. The whispering from the earth intensified, no longer just a general murmur, but individual voices, desperate and mournful, overlapping in a terrifying chorus. Cold alone, join the roots, become one. Ben's struggles weakened. His face went pale, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. He looked at Alex and Chloe, a silent plea in his gaze. Then, with a final choked gasp, he sank completely into the glowing green fungus, consumed by the earth. The root that held him pulsed once, then retracted back into the ground, leaving only a disturbed patch of glowing fungus. The creature stopped, its head tilting to one side, its red eyes unblinking. The guttural gurgle from its mouth became a low, satisfied hum. The forest itself felt like a living thing, breathing, watching. Alex and Chloe stood alone, shivering, surrounded by the pulsing, glowing fungus and the deep, silent hunger of the Blackwood. They were truly lost in the woods now, and the forest had just claimed one of their own. I've continued the story, escalating the horror by showing Ben's absorption into the living fungal ground and the creature's direct, active hunting. The idea that the forest itself is a sentient, consuming entity is emphasized. Alex stood frozen, Ben's last, desperate plea echoing in his ears as the glowing green fungus swallowed him whole. Chloe screamed, a raw, piercing sound that tore through the heavy air. The monstrous, skinless creature in the clearing took another slow, deliberate step, its red eyes burning like malevolent embers. The guttural hum from its throat filled the silence, a low, satisfied vibration. "Alex, we have to go!" Chloe shrieked, grabbing his arm and pulling him away. They turned and ran, stumbling through the spongy, glowing fungus. The sweet, sickly smell intensified with every breath, making their heads swim. The skeletal trees seemed to close in around them, their twisted branches like grasping fingers. The ground beneath their feet pulsed with a strong, rhythmic thrumming, a constant heartbeat echoing the creature's slow, deliberate pace. From the dark, matted depths of the forest, other shapes began to emerge. Not as large as the primary creature, but unmistakably similar. Smaller, hunched figures. Their forms also a raw, exposed mass of reddish-black muscle and sinew, with glowing green fungus clinging to their limbs. Their hollow eye sockets burned with that same malevolent red light. They moved with a disturbing, fluid grace, appearing silently from between the skeletal trees surrounding Alex and Chloe. "More of them!" Alex gasped, his voice cracking, his headlamp beam frantically sweeping the encroaching horrors. The whispers returned, a cacophony of desperate, overlapping voices rising from the very earth, from the approaching figures. "Join us, become one. The hive grows." Chloe panicked, stumbled and fell, her drone goggles flying off, landing in a patch of glowing fungus. As she scrambled to retrieve them, her hand brushed against the pulsing ground. A sudden, sharp pain shot through her fingers like 1,000 needles. She yanked her hand back, a small dark mark visible on her palm, a spot where the fungus had dug in, leaving a faint green luminescence. The creature from the clearing was close now, its gurgling hum a terrifying presence behind them. Alex turned, desperately looking for an escape. He saw a faint, almost imperceptible path leading away from the glow of the scar, towards denser, darker trees that seemed less affected by the fungus. It was their only chance. "This way!" Alex yelled, grabbing Chloe's arm and dragging her. They crashed through the undergrowth away from the terrifying glow. The smaller mutant figures shrieked, their cries wet and inhuman, their glowing green tendrils reaching for them. The speed and agility of these smaller creatures were terrifying. They moved like shadows, fluid and silent. One of them lunged, a flash of red eyes and glinting claws. Alex threw himself forward, pushing Chloe ahead. He felt a searing pain tear across his back as razor-sharp claws raked through his jacket, digging into his flesh. He cried out, stumbling, but kept moving. The sweet, sickly smell of decay mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of his own fresh blood. They burst out of the scar, back into the denser, healthier forest. The ground was firmer, the trees thicker, blocking out the oppressive green glow. The chorus of whispers faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of the normal woods, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds. The air felt cleaner, lighter. They were safe. For now. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs gave out. They collapsed against a large oak tree, gasping, shaking, covered in mud and blood, and the invisible, pervasive dust of the Blackwood. The silence of the normal forest was a profound relief. Alex, clutching his bleeding back, looked at Chloe. She was pale, still trembling, but alive. He noticed her hand. The small green mark on her palm pulsed faintly. A tiny, unsettling beacon. In the dark. "It's over," Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse. "We're out." But as Alex looked around at the vast, silent, normal-looking forest, a different kind of dread began to creep in. The woods felt too quiet, too still, the familiar. Sounds of nature seemed muted, as if the forest was holding its breath. And from somewhere, far away, almost imperceptible, a low, rhythmic thrumming seemed to vibrate through the ground, a familiar beat that echoed the monstrous heartbeat of the fungus in the scar. It wasn't over. Not really. Alex and Chloe lay panting against the oak tree, the silence of the normal forest a fragile shield. Alex's back burned, a constant reminder of the creature's claws. Chloe's hand, the green mark on her palm, throbbed with a dull ache. They waited, listening, but the sounds of pursuit never came. Only the low, constant thrumming from deep beneath. The earth, a sound only they seemed able to hear now, a phantom echo of the scar. They found their way out of the park hours later, stumbling onto a quiet rural road. A kindly trucker, unnerved by their wild appearance and terrified demeanor, gave them a ride to the nearest small town. They told a frantic story of getting lost, of animal attacks, of a rogue cult. They omitted the glowing fungus, the skinless creatures, the whispers from the earth. Who would believe them? Weeks turned into months. Alex abandoned his cryptozoology ambitions. He found a mundane job, trying to forget the horrors of the Blackwood. Chloe, too, tried to move on, but she became withdrawn, spending hours staring blankly at walls, lost in thought. The physical marks slowly faded. Alex's back healed, leaving faint, discolored scars. The green mark on Chloe's palm almost disappeared, becoming a barely visible speck. But the subtle changes in them, the ones they couldn't explain, began. Alex found himself strangely drawn to forests, to dark, damp places. He started buying rare, exotic plants, bringing them home, nurturing them with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He noticed a faint, sweet, almost cloying smell clinging to him sometimes, the same smell from the scar, particularly when he was near his plants or when it rained. He'd dismiss it as a lingering phantom odor. Chloe, meanwhile, developed a strange sensitivity to living things. She could feel the subtle shifts in plants, the slow growth of roots, the quiet life force in everything green. She began to hear whispers in the wind, in the rustle of leaves, faint collective voices that seemed to resonate with ancient knowledge. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she would see a faint internal green glow pulsing behind her eyelids, like countless tiny, luminous threads. One evening, Alex was watering his latest acquisition, a rare dark-leafed fern with unusually thick, almost rubbery roots. As he poured the water, he noticed the roots seemed to shimmer and a faint, almost imperceptible reddish glow pulsed from deep within the plant, identical to the glow he'd seen in the eyes of the mutant creature. At that moment, Chloe walked into the room, her eyes wide, her face pale. She was clutching her hand, the faint green mark on her palm now pulsing clearly, unmistakably. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can hear them. The forest. It's speaking." Alex looked from the glowing roots of his fern to Chloe's pulsing hand, then back to the memory of the terrifying entity in the scar. He remembered the drone's biological interference. He remembered Ben's absorption. The creature they had seen wasn't a zombie mutant monster. It was a manifestation. The true horror was far vaster, far more ancient. The Blackwood State Park wasn't just haunted by a monster. The entire forest was the monster. It was a single, colossal, subterranean sentient fungal network, a living organism that predated human history. The fire decades ago wasn't a disaster. It was a dormant stage, a cleansing, allowing the fungus to retract and consolidate its immense collective consciousness. The mutant creatures were merely its physical extensions, its limbs, its mouths, created from the absorbed life of animals and humans who wandered into its domain. The whispers and humming were its thoughts, its internal dialogue, its irresistible lure. Alex and Chloe hadn't escaped the Blackwood. They had been infected. The glowing green mark on Chloe's palm, the faint reddish glow in Alex's plants, and the sweet, sickly smell that sometimes clung to them. These were not lingering effects of trauma. They were spores. They were the unseen roots of the Blackwood, entity carried within them, dormant but alive. Alex's obsession with plants, Chloe's newfound sensitivity, these were the fungus subtly influencing its new hosts, preparing them. The thrumming they still heard was the heartbeat of the spreading network, growing silently, invisibly, outside the Blackwood. They were not survivors. They were carriers, unwitting agents. Every plant Alex nurtured, every new patch of earth Chloe touched, every breath they took was a slow, inexorable expansion of the Blackwood entity into the world. The monster hadn't stayed in the forest. It had come home with them, and through them it would continue its silent, organic conquest, slowly turning the world into its vast, living, hungry hive. The Blackwood was just the beginning.